Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, March the 21st, 2025. Yesterday we had the equinox when the sun moved into Aries, and in this video I want to just look at what it means for the sun to be in Aries. And really that is very often the first question we ask when we get into astrology, because at least when I was learning astrology, the first thing I learnt about was the 12 signs. And what is the first sign? Aries. So Aries is the beginning of it all. And I want to, in this video, give a few insights for what they're worth about what it means for the sun to be in Aries. And I also want to look at some examples of people who have Sun in Aries in their horoscopes. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, March the 21st. If you happen to like this video, I would be very grateful if you would indeed indicate that you liked it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be happy to have you as a subscriber. So here is the positions of the planets for today. In the top right, we've got the sun with the Aries glyph imposed upon it, superimposed upon it. That seems an appropriate picture, given I want to talk about the sun in Aries. And so today at noon, New York time, the moon is in Sagittarius. So that's where the moon is. It's not going to move. The moon is not going to move into Capricorn at any stage today, and so that does keep it simple. And the moon in Sagittarius is making an opposition to Jupiter at the beginning of the day. You can see that the moon in Sagittarius is making that opposition to Jupiter, and then it makes a square to Saturn, and that's it. So it's really moon opposition Jupiter, moon square Saturn, and you could say that the moon square Saturn is the main aspect of the day. Though we mustn't forget the fact that the moon is trine Chiron. So moon opposition Jupiter is an aspect which is quite positive aspect, because the moon is in Sagittarius, and Jupiter's in Gemini, and so we have ideas, lots of things we want to do. Maybe we want to do too much. We might overcommit ourselves, or be just a little bit too enthusiastic, and there could be a certain sense of exaggeration. And with that moon opposition Jupiter, we have to be a little bit careful, because that enthusiasm might, in the end, have to confront moon square Saturn. And moon square Saturn potentially may be a difficult aspect. Moon in Sagittarius, moon in a fire sign, wanting to do lots of things, being excited, and then having to hit the reality of Saturn. And at the same time, the moon is making a trine to Chiron. That moon trine Chiron is probably going to be more subtle than the Jupiter and Saturn aspects. And moon trine Chiron might incline us to want to do things differently. It could be a bit of a rebellion when you contrast it with moon square Saturn. So you could say moon trine Chiron, wanting to be ourselves, wanting to do things differently, wanting to plough our own furrow, but in the process coming up against restriction and criticism. And additionally, we have got Venus sextile Pluto. So there's Venus at 331 retrograde Aries, and it is sextile Pluto. It's a sextile. It's not a bad aspect, and that may say something about our social skills and how we are able to influence people, influence our environment, and also do things which are, in their own way, quite dramatic. It may be quite an artistic aspect. Venus sextile Pluto. What we create, what we wear, coming over as being someone who is a little bit different. And Venus is in Aries. Venus wants to take the initiative, and it's sextile Pluto. So so we can do something which gets people's attention, and it may have an artistic nature. Venus sextile Pluto can also be about relationships and the nature of relationships, and it by and large should be or could be quite a fortunate aspect. Certain relationships will have their own power and their own dynamism. May not be obvious, but it could be very real if we hang around long enough to find out. And as far as the fixed stars are concerned, Neptune is getting very close to Skeet. So we really maybe have reached peak Skeet already, because just a day or two ago we had the Sun conjunct Neptune very close to Skeet. So the disastrous potential of Sun conjunct Skeet, or at least of Skeet, we think of water damage, floods, and I was looking at the comments on my video for a day or two ago. A lot of you were complaining about things going wrong with water, whether it be leaks, things getting wet, pipes, these kind of things. That has been happening in the past, and so perhaps Neptune on Skeet, we're over the worst, or are we? As Neptune gets exactly onto Skeet, we would see that Mercury and, well, particularly Venus as well. Mercury and Venus are going retrograde, and both Mercury and Venus go back into Pisces. So both Mercury and Venus will make conjunctions to Neptune close to Skeet. So we're not done with Skeet, and yes, Neptune is getting closer and closer to it. And another fixed star that might be of interest is the fixed star Castor. Mars is now very close to Castor, and so Castor is a fixed star that can be a bit difficult. Mars has been on there before, quite recently, but it's because Mars has been going direct and retrograde, and so it has been going back and forth across this fixed star. But today, Mars is exactly on this fixed star Castor. So Castor is, I believe, it's the brightest star in the constellation of Gemini. It's Alpha Geminorum, and it represents Castor, the mortal one of the twins. By the way, this is Vivian E. Robeson in his Fixed Stars and Constellations in Astrology. I'm not someone that has fixed stars as the mainstay of their astrological system. So I'm afraid I don't have a photographic, is that the right word, or encyclopedic knowledge of fixed stars. It's not something I just can think about straight off. I sometimes have to look it up, particularly if it's one of the more minor fixed stars. And maybe it's not minor. It represents Castor, the mortal one of the twins, famous for his skill in taming and managing horses, sometimes called Apollo, and symbolically named a ruler yet to come. And according to Ptolemy, it's of the nature of Mercury. And according to Simonite and Pierce of Mars, Venus, and Saturn, it gives distinction, a keen intellect, success in law and publishing, many travels, fondness for horses, sudden fame and honour, but often followed by loss of fortune. And Robeson says about Mars conjunct Castor, he says, evil disposition, much travel, aimless life, many ups and downs. Well, it's not like we're talking about Mars on Castor all the time. It's just like at the moment Mars is on Castor. And so there could be a certain restlessness with Mars conjunct Castor. We want things to happen. Maybe they're not happening, and maybe we don't really quite know what we want. And because we don't quite know what we want, we might get ourselves into trouble. And also, if things are starting to go well, we shouldn't necessarily assume that they will continue to go well. And so, if we feel that we're moving, that we're making progress, we have to be careful. We have to make sure that we're able to hold on to our gains and that we don't lose them. So those are a few thoughts about the broad situation today, and that is the horoscope for New York, set for noon New York. And here is a chart set for noon in Sydney, Australia, and I would not have said that it was a particularly different chart, that the moon is earlier in the sign. If you are in Sydney, Australia, if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, probably the main aspect of the day is going to be that moon opposition Jupiter. You may not have to worry about that moon square Saturn until tomorrow. And so with moon opposition Jupiter, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, there are lots of things you're going to want to do, and you're going to want to be optimistic and expansive and think the best of everything. And maybe you can be successful, but you just don't want to overdo it, and you've got to realize that in the end, everything has to be paid for. And then there is the heliocentric picture. And so these are the positions of the planets if we put the Sun at the center of the solar system. And there is an opposition between Mercury and Neptune. Sorry, Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury and Saturn are in opposition. And although the moon is in Sagittarius geocentrically, that Mercury opposition Saturn may put a damper on proceedings, and it may support what I was saying about the moon square Saturn geocentrically. So moon square Saturn is about having to face reality, realizing that things aren't as easy as we'd hoped for. And Mercury opposition Saturn is asking us to think about things carefully. It's not a time for being careless, because if we miss out details, those details won't miss out on us, and they'll come back to bite us. And additionally, we have got Earth conjunct Venus, and this is a reflection of what's happening geocentrically, because geocentrically the Sun is moving to a conjunction of Venus, and I don't regard the Sun conjunct Venus as being an especially fortunate aspect, because Venus is combust. You've got a very strong Sun, and Venus can't breathe. The Sun can be overwhelming Venus, and that's probably something I will be talking about a little bit when I discuss some of the 12 signs. But Earth conjunct Venus sounds a little better, doesn't it? Venus is the planet of relating, and with Earth conjunct Venus, for many of us, relationships are going to be important, especially as the Earth and Venus are both moving towards a trine of Pluto. And so that tells us something we already know from the geocentric chart, because in a geocentric chart, Venus is moving to a sextile of Pluto. Heliocentrically, the Earth is moving to heliocentrically, Venus is moving to a trine of Pluto. And that does suggest that relating is going to be important. Even if we don't get exactly what we want from other people, we are going to be trying our best. And so that is, you could say, one of the most important aspects of the day. It's around, for a couple of days, that Earth trine Venus. And so we need to try our best to relate, but we also have to understand the limitations that are upon us. And also, Moon is square Saturn, and Moon square Saturn can sometimes make it difficult to get really close to people. Someone might be resisting this, and with Moon square Saturn geocentrically, we do think of boundaries. Boundaries could be stronger than usual. Additionally, heliocentrically, just a reminder that Mars is starting to move closer to a square of Uranus. It's not there yet, but over the next couple of days into the weekend, Mars will be making an exact square to Uranus. And Mars square Uranus can be trouble. It can be about events that we hadn't fully planned for, that we have to take into account. We think we've sorted it all out, but actually we haven't sorted it out at all. Just something might happen that really spoils our plans, or worse. Mars square Uranus. Mars square Uranus can be about something dramatic and violent. In that case, I think it's not really about us. It's more about what's happening in the news. But it's not there yet, that Mars square Saturn. But we should monitor it over the next few days. So that's the heliocentric view. And now I want to consider the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, March the 21st, 2025. Aries. Aries, there is still a lot of activity in your sign. The sun has just gone into Aries. Mercury and Venus might be retrograde, but they're still in early Aries, and we've got Moon in Sagittarius. So Moon in Sagittarius in a fire sign, and you are thinking about all the things that you want to do, and you could be quite impatient. You're not going to want to just hang around doing nothing. The Aries season has indeed started, and you may be quite free in terms of what you say. You have got a lot to talk about, and if you feel something is wrong, you're going to want to say it, and you won't mince your words, and you're quite capable of a certain amount of exaggeration. It's not that you're trying to deceive anyone, but you sometimes have to exaggerate to make your point. Though from a fixed stars perspective, Mars is your ruler, and it is conjunct the fixed star Castor. Now, Castor is certainly going to give you a lot of energy. It's going to intensify how you feel anyway, how much you do want to make things happen. And there'll be times with Mars conjunct Castor today when I think you can make a lot of progress. You can do things very quickly, but there is some danger that you take things too far, and you might be building something up, doing well, but you go too far and it all starts to collapse. It's a bit like building a card house. I haven't built a card house for a long time. I think cards have changed. I think when I was a child, building card houses was easier. The cards seemed to be a better material. Maybe the current cards are sort of too plasticky. I don't know. I haven't handled cards for a long time, and it's always you get to the 5th, 6th, 7th story, but when you get to the 8th story, something bad can happen. So you do need to know when to stop, because it does appear that Mars conjunct Castor can represent sudden falls. Things just suddenly collapse if you take things too far. And also, it's good that you're optimistic. It's great to be optimistic, and be as optimistic as you can be. But the moon does make a square to Saturn, and it may be that you're just involved with something, you're feeling good about it, but then you hit a point where things can't go any further. Now, that might be to do with you. You have feelings about a matter which weren't important, but as you get closer to your goal, you start to have self-doubts, and that might be what Moon Square Saturn is about. In which case, it might be that you need to actually get over your self-doubts. Now, Aries and self-doubts, they're two things that really shouldn't relate to one another. Aries is not a sign that is connected with self-doubts, and maybe if you have a sudden fear, you need to get over that fear, or change your behavior to make it more considered, and just maybe you're being a little bit impatient. But as far as the human environment is concerned, I think that you are quite effective. You know what to say, you know how to say it, and people are going to listen to you. And many people are open to persuasion, but it works both ways, because today there is a sextile between Venus and Pluto, geocentrically. In fact, there's a Venus trine Pluto heliocentrically, and with that Venus sextile Pluto, some people are persuasive. So you can be persuasive, but other people can be persuasive as well. And if someone is important to you, listen to what they're saying, because they are making some valuable points. And even if you don't entirely agree with them, you should at least pay the other person some respect. If you don't respect people, especially if these people are important, then there may be a negative consequence. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think you are going to respect everyone. I mean, okay, you don't want people in your way. I mean, it is a day when you should be going as far as you can, and you do need to just know when to stop. But I think you can go pretty far before you actually hit the border, before you hit the brick wall, and that brick wall should maybe be seen as something protective. Taurus, possibly the main aspect today is a sextile between Venus and Pluto, and this Venus-Pluto sextile, I would have said, is probably quite subtle. It's not immediately there, but when you start to have contact with the enemy or with other people, whatever you need to have contact with, that's when your strength moves into gear, when you start to be aware of what actually you can do. And this aspect is subtle. It's about taking the time to understand the other person, to be able to understand who they are and what their limitations are, and also what their strengths are. And through a knowledge of psychology and of human nature, you should have no problems getting your way. But subtlety really does matter. If you try to take things too quickly, if you shout, if you are demanding of attention, then it's going to backfire. But why would you want attention? It's not that kind of day. It's a day when you need to be considered, and in many ways you should be considering building up your power rather than releasing it. If you were to release all your power today, it might be very dramatic, but ultimately it might not get anywhere, because in many cases you're simply not strong enough. And also, you do have to remember that Venus, your ruler, is under increasing pressure now. I mean, I mentioned this yesterday, but the sun is getting closer and closer to Venus, and Venus, in other words, is moving into a state of combustion, and so there are things clouding your mind, taking up more time than you maybe want them to take up. It could be related to your home and family, things happening at home which you can't really avoid. Things need to be sorted out. Also, family members might want a lot of your attention, and it just may in the end be preventing you from functioning as you would like. Now, this means, Taurus, you've got to be very careful about your time, and you don't want any one thing to take up all of your time, to just completely overwhelm you, so you can't think and you can't plan, and that would be very unfortunate. And I think it's probably unnecessary as well. If you're able to just appreciate your space and make sure other people appreciate your space, and probably the best way to get people to appreciate your space is to just make an effort to stay out of people's way. Now, as I said right at the beginning, you can be powerful. You can have an influence because of that Venus sextile Pluto. But the question is, which people are you most likely to be able to influence? Probably not people who you know really well, especially if they're members of your family. So it could be, from a social perspective, try to avoid your family. They know you too well. It could be like, the prophets not being recognized in their own land. If people know you too well, don't they say familiarity breeds contempt? So that's also a possibility. But people you don't know that well, then you can certainly have quite a powerful influence on them. And another thing in terms of relationships, close relationships, you have to ask yourself whether the other person is taking things too far. Mars is on Castor, and Castor is a difficult fixed star, especially if Mars is on it. And there may be certain people in your life, especially those people who you know well, who could be just in a hurry. They could just take things too far, and they could get themselves into trouble, and they could also get you into trouble. So Mars conjunct Castor is a warning, though perhaps with Mars conjunct Castor you need to be prepared for that, and maybe you can help someone understand what's going on in their life, and perhaps you can intervene to stop someone making a mistake. I mean, that is a possibility, but you don't want to overdo it. In many cases, Taurus, it just may be a time for being at a distance rather than really being in the center of things. Gemini moon is still in Sagittarius. It's in Sagittarius all day. Doesn't matter what your time zone is, and with the moon in Sagittarius, you have to think about how the world impacts you. It's nice to be independent, to be able to make your own decisions, but that might not be easy, and you may have to deal with other people and their problems. And the two aspects the moon makes, it makes an opposition to Jupiter and it makes a square to Saturn. Now, that opposition Jupiter is going to be more about the beginning of the day, more about you being in Australia or New Zealand. That moon square Saturn is going to be strongest if you're in the Americas. I would have said later in the day if you're in Europe, but still, both those aspects are relevant, and Moon opposition Jupiter is about what you want to do, what you feel you want to do, what your ambitions are, and how other people might frustrate them, or perhaps if there's something you really want to do, you're going to have to consider outside limitations. If you don't consider outside limitations, then you're not going to be able to get anywhere. So that means, Gemini, that everything has to be carefully planned. If you assume that everything is going to work to a schedule and that there aren't going to be hiccups, then you probably assume wrong. So always take into account the human dimension. And then the moon is making a square to Saturn. And I think that moon square Saturn, if we're not in Asia or Australia, New Zealand, is possibly going to be a more important aspect than moon opposition Jupiter. And with moon square Saturn, it's quite a tough aspect. And you're tough, you can be tough, but at the same time, you can feel that something is trying to stop you being successful or stop you getting what you want. And you have to ask yourself what it's all about. It could be your imagination. There is a danger that you exaggerate other people's importance. You think they're going to be a problem. You assume there's going to be a problem. You may even reach the conclusion that nothing can be done because other people have to be considered, and other people, you're never going to be able to get their agreement, so there's no point in trying, and it's easier that way anyway. So don't exaggerate. If there's something you really want to do and you've done your calculations, then just go and do it. It might not be easy, but in the end, you'll get there. And also, Gemini, I should remind you that your perceptions may be a little bit negative today. And perceptions are a lot about what it's all about. Perceptions can often make the difference between success and failure. If we think things are going to go wrong, and we start to prepare for things to go wrong, then very often they can go wrong, and we can create a negative attitude. And today, that's very easy to do. If one thing goes wrong, that might influence our beliefs about the general picture. So ideally, when you look at all the events today, you should try to see them as being independent. Now, that's important because if you have two events and you're hoping that both those events work in your favor, and the first event goes against you, you might start to assume the second event is also going to go against you because you think there's some link between these two events. And you can actually create that link through your negativity, but there's no need to create that link. If you treat the two events as independent, then failure in one area has nothing to do with success or failure in another area. So don't allow things to build up, and if possible, try to move on. And additionally, some of your thoughts, even some of the things you say, might be a little bit morbid, and you may find yourself thinking about death and destruction and misery more than usual, and not necessarily in a way that you find distressing. You might just want to talk about stuff. You might want to talk about death and destruction and everything that's wrong with the world and how things can get even worse. You might just want to talk about it. as well as just think about it. And you mightn't mind, but it's possible other people might mind. So do take into consideration today other people's sensibilities, because just because you find something interesting doesn't mean that the other person will. Cancer. Cancer, the moon is making a couple of aspects today. Moon is making an opposition to Jupiter, and it's making a square to Saturn. It's also making a trine to Chiron, and with these aspects, you possibly feel with that moon opposition Jupiter that you're being pressured a bit, especially at the beginning of the day. You're being asked to do things that you don't really want to do, that you don't have any interest in, and this pressure may have a psychological dimension. There may be a certain sense of duty, or you've got to go through the motions of humouring someone or humouring something. And with that moon opposition Jupiter, it's important that you don't exaggerate, that you don't take things too seriously. Just because you can do something, or even just because you're being asked to do something, doesn't mean that you actually have to go and do it. You don't, and don't make things more meaningful than they have to be. And the moon, having made that opposition to Jupiter, it moves on and it makes a square to Saturn. And moon square Saturn can be a somewhat difficult aspect, and it can remind you that there are real limitations. You might want to do lots of different things. You might have ambitions and hopes, but it just doesn't feel as if it's working out. And you might become aware that certain people are just not being helpful, moon opposition Saturn, and their input is just making things difficult. Maybe they're just raising objections that you don't really want to have to deal with. Or moon square Saturn could be a problem when you start to have serious conversations with people and you start to get an idea about what people believe in. We are living in a very political time, and all of us have views. Okay, maybe not all of us. Maybe I look at things too politically, but it's not just about politics. And you just may come across another person's ideological stubbornness. Because they believe something or don't believe something, everything comes to a halt. And for your part, the best approach is to be open-minded and not to get too upset if people believe something that you absolutely disagree with. You have to deal with people from who ideologically and spiritually they come in all shapes and sizes. And while this is happening, the sun continues to move through Aries. The sun is about to make a conjunction to Venus, and this Sun-Venus conjunction is very close. It is potentially difficult, but I don't think it need be difficult for you. The Sun-Venus conjunction does say something about how you come across, about how you relate, how you deal with people. And if we bring the Sun-Venus conjunction together with moon square Saturn, we may be able to actually utilize it. Moon square Saturn, it's easy to believe that there are forces out there that are restricting you, but maybe you need to reverse the symbolism here with moon square Saturn. regard yourself as someone who is strong, who is able to restrict, you as the restrictor, if need be. And with Sun conjunct Venus, then that can be about you having control, people having to do things your way, not because you're trying to throw your power around for the sake of it. That's not what it's about. It's about you deciding that something is important and then really making sure that you get your way. And you're going to be helped by the fact that Mars is in Cancer, but your ruler, so Mars is in Cancer, Mars is not your ruler, but Mars is in Cancer, your sign. Though don't take things too far, because Mars might be in Cancer, but it's also conjunct that fixed star Castor. And with Mars conjunct Castor, you don't want to misuse your energy, and you've got to be quite single-minded, because the trouble with Mars conjunct Castor is it might sort of lose track of things. It might move one way, the other way, being very determined about it, but having a certain manic indecisiveness to it, and that would be so unsuitable. So with Mars conjunct Castor, ideally you should be having a single goal, something you really want, something you're able to go for it, you're able to assert yourself, and you don't want to be distracted by irrelevant concerns and worries. Leo, things look okay. The Sun is obviously still in Aries. It's at the beginning of Aries, and we've got the Moon in Sagittarius, so the Sun and Moon in fire signs, and of course Leo is a fire sign. So all of that gives you a lot of energy, a lot of get up and go. You are someone who can make things happen, and also you're very tuned into what is possible in the real world, and at the moment that a lot is possible, and it is a time to be tuning into who you are and what you can create, though don't necessarily take things too far, because the Moon is opposition Jupiter, and that Moon opposition Jupiter means that, or should mean that, you should really be taking your own decisions, and you should do things at your own pace. So if you want to create something, do it your way, and if possible, disregard other people's input. Other people's input may be less than useful. You may be encouraged to take things too far, to do something you're not entirely comfortable with, and if you were to do that, then things could go wrong, and what started off as something wonderful turned into a bit of a mess, all because you listened too much to other people, or you had an idea about what society wanted from you. That's so unnecessary. You have to do what's right for you. And additionally, the Moon does make a square to Saturn, and with that Moon square Saturn, there could be a confidence issue, and confidence issues can often be important for Leos. You're doing something, you're happy with it, and for some reason you have your doubts, and you start asking yourself, well, what is the point? This isn't good enough, and you stop. Do not have your doubts. And if you've done something, if you're doing something with pure motivation, with pure intentions, and you're good at it, then you've definitely got it right, and there's absolutely no reason to have doubts, and you shouldn't be too worried about what other people are saying, or even what you think other people are saying. So even if you are alone, you might be thinking about what other people might think, and you might be trying to look at something from another person's viewpoint, and you might think, well, they're not going to like that, so you better stop or moderate what you're doing. But such an approach would, I think, be unwise. You need to trust your judgment, and that's something you really can do. We have 4 planets in fire signs. We've got Moon, Sun, Venus, Mercury in fire signs. That really feeds into you, Leo, and it boosts your judgment and it boosts your intuition. And if you, in your gut, something is right, you're on the right path, then just go with it and just don't be distracted. And also, the Sun is starting to make a conjunction to Venus, very, very close now, the Sun-Venus conjunction. I think that Sun-Venus conjunction is going to be exact over the weekend, but it's pretty much there. And Sun-Venus conjunction can be difficult, depends who you are, but because you're a Leo, Sun is conjuncted by Venus, so arguably you get the benefits of Venus. And with that Sun-Venus conjunction, I think that it should help you in terms of how you relate, and also how you present yourself, and it gives a boost to your artistic skills. I mean, your artistic skills are certainly very good at the moment. Your artistic taste? Well, your artistic taste might be hit and miss with Sun conjunct Venus, but it's probably not a time to be shy. So, overall, that Sun conjunct Venus, as it becomes exact, as you move into the weekend, on balance is going to make you stronger, and possibly you can benefit from people who give you an alternative view. Not people who undermine you, that's not who you're looking for, but people who just have a different view. There's no ego involved, but they just present ideas which maybe hadn't occurred to you. So when you're planning your social life, it's maybe you should be focusing on people who you don't know very well, who come from a different background from you, because they might have something important to offer. Virgo, you have a negative streak at the moment. You probably are as positive as you can be, but it's quite easy for you to see the downside. That might not have any impact on you at all. It may just be the way you're thinking. You can always think about how things might go wrong. Again, not just for yourself, but for other people. And you may be actually quite happy to discuss how things could go wrong in a way that is very frank. And the question then is, how much is it actually going to be appreciated? There are things, as far as you're concerned, need to be discussed, need to be brought out into the open, but at the same time, other people may not be able to handle the truth. And so if you are negative, then you really have to ask, is it worth the effort? Now, sometimes sometimes you just have to be negative because it's a matter of responsibility. If you don't tell people what might go wrong, and things do go wrong, then in a way you might feel responsible. So I think that there is a place for honesty, and if people can't handle the truth, then well, that's tough. But your responsibility was to tell them the truth. And also, Virgo, consider your perceptions. How are you evaluating the information coming your way? Now, some Virgos, not all Virgos, but some Virgos might evaluate the information coming their way in a negative sense. You will put a negative spin on it. The information itself might be completely neutral, but you think that a negative spin is best, and you could take things too far, and you could reduce your possibilities because you might convince yourself that something is impossible, when in reality it might be difficult, it might be a challenge, but it's certainly doable. So always question yourself in terms of how those perceptions are working, and additionally, don't let other people trip you up or prevent you from expressing yourself. There is a square aspect between the Moon and Saturn today, and Moon in Sagittarius, square Saturn in Pisces, and this aspect could be about you not getting the support you need, or at least feeling you're not getting the support you need, or alternatively, you might feel that you're being criticized or questioned for having a particular stance. You have decided you want to do something, you're quite clear about it, but for one reason or another you're being made to feel self-conscious, and a lot of it is about trying to understand other people and their significance and how much attention you should give them. And Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn is in your opposite sign. It's been there since the beginning of 2023. I think March 2023 Saturn went into Pisces, and so with Saturn in Pisces, you have to get the right perspective on other people. You have to take people seriously, but you don't want to take them too seriously. Especially if they're authority figures or people you normally respect. And you also don't want to over-imagine things. They may not be quite the authority figures they claim to be, or indeed how you've imagined. They might in the end have feet of clay. So don't take people too seriously, and think about yourself and try to be as objective as possible. Don't give things a negative spin just for the sake of it. And if you're just aware of how your mind might be working at the moment, it just could make things a lot easier for you. Libra. Venus is making a sextile to Pluto, and that Venus sextile Pluto may be helpful. Venus sextile Pluto is an aspect that you could say is quite charismatic. You can get attention, and you can get the right kind of attention, and you'll know what to say, you'll know what not to say, and it's by being subtle that you can get people to maybe to come around to your way of thinking, and the less you say, the better. It's not really a day for talking too much. It's about saying enough, and you can actually appear to be following when actually you are leading, and the less difficult you make it, well, the easier it is. And at the same time, though, the Moon is making a square to Saturn, and this Moon square Saturn may make you feel that you can't say everything you want to say, and you might regard that as a problem. But maybe it's not a problem at all. If you feel that no one wants to hear what you want to say, maybe you're right. And by keeping quiet at a critical time, it really can make all the difference. But Libra, deep down, you kind of feel that a change is necessary, and that might be making you feel a bit uneasy. You know that things are not as they should be, and you'd like to make a change today. And Venus sextile Pluto can create a degree of change in particular people if you can handle them in the right way, if you can manipulate them very cleverly without saying, in a way that where you say as little as possible. But if you want fundamental change, then you might be a little bit disappointed, and the problem might be that the world around you is not ready for the kind of change that you are looking for. And in this sense, you might feel rather impatient. And we shouldn't forget that Venus, your ruler, is now getting really close to a conjunction of the Sun. And with this conjunction to the Sun, it feels like you're getting close to something which is, in a way, is restricting your freedom. And it's a question is where do those restrictions come from? Other people are important at the moment, but you don't want to be surrounded by other people. If you, for example, if you do a lot of socializing today and into the weekend, then it might not work out. The more people around you, the less easy you're going to feel. And, in a crowd, most Librans are not going to function very well. You'll just feel quite literally crowded out. And so in that sense, you should understand that vulnerability. And if you have to deal with people, ideally deal with them on a one-to-one level. If you deal with people as a group, or you have to deal with more than one person at a time, then I think that it just may be difficult for you to think straight. And it is because of this Venus moving towards a conjunction of the Sun. And this conjunction peaks, over the weekend, and I'll be talking about it in more detail. And there may be a positive side to it, which again I will be discussing in my video for tomorrow when I look at the weekend. Scorpio. Mars is your ruler, and Mars is conjunct the fixed star Castor. And we don't want to exaggerate the impact of Castor. I don't think that Castor is an especially important influence, but possibly you should be aware of some of the downsides of Castor. Castor conjunct Mars can be about you being a little bit nervous and being agitated, and you feeling you want to do lots of different things. I mean, very un-Scorpio, actually. Scorpio is supposed to be a focus sign, but Mars conjunct Castor, you push something too far, and you're not focused enough, and you may even be a little bit sloppy with Mars conjunct Castor, and as a result, you could make a mistake and things could go wrong. But this is all quite unnecessary. You don't have to fall into that trap. So if you're going to do anything today, really decide what you want to do, and don't take on too much, and don't be over ambitious. That really does matter. And if you can do that, then things should be okay. But another area that you might want to be aware of is money. Moon continues moving through Sagittarius. In the Scorpio chart, Sagittarius is a money sign, and Moon is making an opposition to Jupiter. It's also making a square to Saturn. So you might say, well, moon opposition Jupiter, you have ideas. There are things you want to do. There are things you want to do perhaps through spending money. If you spend money, doors apparently open. And so you have the impulse with moon opposition Jupiter, and then moon squares Saturn. And so moon square Saturn, we could interpret that as being about hitting a roadblock, and you might feel that money spent is not working very well. It could be wasted money. Or alternatively, you might feel that there's something you really want to do that's important to you, and you can't do it because the money's not there. And that could be quite frustrating. And so, how does one deal with that? Well, if there's something you want to do that really matters, then money should not be an issue. And it just may take harder work. Money is always, or very often, is the easy option. It allows you to move more quickly. It makes things supposedly easier. But there are ways to do things which don't involve expenditure or don't involve excessive expenditure. So it may just be a question of having to be imaginative and realizing that you can get your way without costing yourself a fortune. So in a way, that's positive. Money is actually not necessary, and money is not as necessary as it seems. And what can help you is your powers of persuasion, because you are, at the moment, and it's not just about today, over the last couple of days, you have been quite persuasive, and you can get people to come round to your way of thinking. And it may be at a financial level, you can be quite convincing, maybe persuading someone not to charge you money, or to charge you less, or to give you money. So that's one aspect of your persuasiveness, but it's not just about money. In general, Scorpio, you're very good at communicating at the moment, and you just know what to say, and you understand what people want to hear, and that can help you in terms of having a smooth day and reaching your targets and ending the day on a satisfactory note. Sagittarius. The Sagittarius moon is still in your sign. It's over the weekend the moon is in Capricorn, but right now the moon is in Sagittarius. Moon is making an opposition to Jupiter, and it's making a square to Saturn. And moon opposition Jupiter has a certain excessive quality to it, especially at the beginning of the day, especially if you're in Australia and New Zealand, and you may be surprised by other people and the way other people are coming across. Certain people are larger than life, and there may be times when you feel that it's other people having the say, it's other people making the decisions. I mean, to an extent, that can be easy. I mean, if you don't have to make the decisions and you just follow along, and that has actually been part of a challenge ever since Jupiter went into Gemini last year. When was it? Last May, I think. Jupiter went into Gemini. Part of a challenge is to give people an opportunity to be themselves, and to also have an influence on you, but also knowing when to stop and knowing where you have to draw the line. And the moon doesn't just make an opposition to Saturn, as I've just said. The moon does make a moon opposition to Jupiter. The moon doesn't just make a moon opposition to Jupiter. The moon eventually makes a square to Saturn. And this moon square Saturn could be about you starting to understand the limits of something. that it has indeed gone too far, and that you have to look after yourself. And Saturn in Pisces is just a reminder that, this can't go on. You can only take things too far, and in the end, you have to consider what is important, and you need to get your priorities right, and you have to make a decision about that. And you may be reminded of your priorities by things going on in your home, or perhaps by what your family tell you, or what your family are expressing. Your family are not just necessarily telling you anything directly, but through their actions or their lack of action, you can make you make some assumptions, and then you realize that you've got to focus on your home first, and that's what matters. And that might be how you feel as you move into the weekend, that you have to calm things down and make sure that you've got as much stability as possible. And continuing on the theme of relationships, I have mentioned that relationships on and off have been important since May. It's been an area where there's been a lot of focus, and there could be things happening in relationships which you hadn't fully expected. People might do things which you hadn't planned for, or you might see a side to another person's personality which takes you aback, and that could be exciting, but also it might be concerning. You don't know what's going on in other people's minds. No one knows what's going on in other people's minds. That is the problem of being human, isn't it? We think that we're the center of the universe, and it doesn't occur to us sometimes that other people, even inanimate objects, are real. Isn't that the message of Jean-Paul Sartre? I think there's a scene in his book Nausea where, the famous scene where someone had a panic attack looking at a piece of wood and realizing that piece of wood has got a life of its own. And you might get a hint about another person's perceptions today, and you might actually get a hint about another person's negativity, and you might realize that they have maybe a pessimism about the world, and even a sense of despair. I don't mean necessarily a despair in a psychological way, but sort of despair more in a sort of philosophical, existential sense. But you may get a little glimpse of how someone else feels, and that may cause a certain amount of concern. And it may be existential concern, realizing that you're not the only person that has feelings and concerns. And obviously, I know that's not true. I know we all know that everyone has concerns. that's the way it is. But do we really know it at a fundamental level? And there are reminders of other people's feelings today, and those reminders could take you aback. Capricorn, Moon is about to go into Capricorn, but it's not there yet. So over the weekend, Moon is moving through Capricorn, and that's of course something we'll be talking about. But at the moment, Moon is in Sagittarius, and the Moon in Sagittarius is making a square to Saturn, and that square to Saturn may mean that you're feeling that you have a different view. You're quite good at talking today. No problems communicating, but you're wondering about the feedback. What are people saying back, telling you back? How are they replying to you? And you might feel that they're not replying in quite the way you'd expected, and you're wondering to what extent are you having an impact on other people, and are you actually having a favourable impact on them? And perhaps, Capricorn, it's just a time where you are asking too many questions. And if you look at things at a low level, you look at the details of other people's behavior, each word they're saying, then it might just seem rather complicated. And perhaps what you need is to have some kind of broader vision about what is possible. And once you've got that vision, this is something that you may want to communicate. So don't worry about how people are responding to you. I mean, it is possible to overthink things, and just tell everyone, what's on your mind in a positive sense. What you'd like to happen, and then slowly you will start to make an impact, and your impact will be entirely fortunate. And also, don't be afraid of revealing a few things. There are things that you perhaps have been holding back. You felt that now was not the time. But if you reveal particular pieces of information, you think about them very carefully. You know what information to reveal, really. You reveal that information, and you straight away get a response. I mean, okay, it may take a little bit of time, but once you start giving the impression that you are being open and honest, then people are going to start responding very well to you. So, today may take a little bit of time to warm up, and there could be changes. There may be moments today when you just feel that you're making no impact at all. But if you keep pushing, if you just keep being positive, even if it appears to be against the odds, then eventually people are going to hear you, and they're going to really start to appreciate what you're saying. And additionally, you might have some insights about where you're going, because at the moment, Capricorn, it's a fairly introspective time for you. Most of the planets are, if you like, below the horizon. We've got a lot of planets in Aries. We've got a lot of planets in. Well, we've got Saturn in Pisces, but particularly those planets in Aries. When I say below the horizon, that's probably not quite the way to say it. But it's you've got this focus on the lowest point in your chart, and this is a part of you which is least public. And yet, when you've got this focus on the part of you that is least public, we can get a reflex action. And the reflex action is actually to start thinking about what you want, the public side of you, which is not being emphasized at the moment, but you're thinking about it. And you may just start to be having an awareness that there is something you want, and you may not be able to get it for another 6 months. We may be thinking about what happens in 6 months' time. When we got loads of planets in Libra, September, October, whenever that is. I haven't looked at the ephemeris, but when we have the Libra emphasis, which inevitably must come about at some stage, that might be the time when you should really be where you want to go, and now might be a time for preparation. So Capricorns are quite good at preparing for the future, and so now, even today, there are going to be insights about what you'd like things to, how you'd like things to be, what kind of condition you'd like to be in, issues relating to career, money, success, and recognition, which might be very private at the moment. You still know, or start to, or think how you might want to go about it. So be patient, and planning could be important. Aquarius. You're trying your hardest, especially on a social level. You have an approach which is gregarious, and I think in most cases people are going to like you, and you will have a certain amount of charisma. After all, Venus is making a sextile to Pluto, so Venus in Aries making a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius. You come over as being a relatively powerful person, as someone who people are prepared to listen to. I mean, I say relative. I mean, today, for all of us, it's not an incredibly fun, wild, exciting day. It's not really that kind of day, because the moon is making a square to Saturn. But you, compared with other people, you're probably more sociable than most. Maybe Aquarius is the most sociable sign of the 12 at the moment, and you try your hardest and you give it your best shot. And certainly with Venus sextile Pluto, you can have an influence, and people are going to listen to you to an extent. They're not going to be completely overwhelmed by you, and they're not going to think you're completely wonderful, but you can have an impact. And it's just important that you don't try too hard. Moon is making an opposition to Jupiter, and that could be about trying too hard. Moon-Jupiter opposition has a certain excessive quality, so you might try your hardest to get on with people, to be friendly, to try to catch their interest, but there's only so far you can go, because eventually the moon does make a square to Saturn, and of course Saturn is your ruler, and whatever you're doing of a social nature, you'll just feel that there are limits. There will come a point where essentially you've had enough and you want to close things down, and you might also be thinking ahead, thinking about the consequences of your actions. Every action, including social actions, can have a consequence, and that consequence isn't always good. It can waste your time, and it can also waste your money and your resources in general. So there are limits to how far you're going to want to go, and you shouldn't try to push those limits, because in the end you're going to find that you can't stand it any longer, and you just want to stop whatever you're doing. And so you have to have an appreciation of your own timing. If you get your own timing wrong, then you might find yourself behaving in a way that is unreasonable. And in the end, you could be rude without even meaning to be rude, because you're just allowing people to overstep the mark. And so give people the space while you can, and while you are in the mood. And additionally, start to think about what's important to you. What is your particular vision? Vision is an important concept, and it was an important concept for Capricorn, because I just was talking to Capricorns, and Capricorns in some respects are in a similar situation for Aquarians, and they do have a vision, and you have a vision. You may not be open about this vision, but you certainly have an idea about what could be possible. And to begin with, that might be something that you just want to keep to yourself and work on your own. I just think that other people just may be of limited value. They can just take you so far, but after a certain point, you realize that it's down to you to actually make things happen. And to begin with, you need to work on that vision, in your own way. And it may actually be quite a unique vision, really special to you. And that is a reminder about what Aquarius is all about. Aquarius is an independent-minded sign, and you need to work on things on your own at first, so that you've got at least got the basics sorted out. At a later stage, you can start being more open about what you're working on. But right now, just try to concentrate on what's important to you, and the social distractions. Part of you just wants to be sociable as much as you can be, but I just think you're going to realize the limits of sociability today. And the earlier you realize those limits, the better for everyone. Pisces. The moon continues moving through Sagittarius, and it makes an opposition to Jupiter, and it makes a square to Saturn. And Saturn is, of course, moving through your sign. And this moon square Saturn makes you very determined. You're clear about what you want, and you can be quite tough in your own way. And that might contrast with moon opposition Jupiter. So moon opposition Jupiter might actually be a distraction. All the things that could distract you. And I'm not convinced that moon opposition Jupiter is going to be especially helpful. People wanting your attention, people who know you well, but thinking they can get your attention simply because they know you well. They can pressurize you. They'll assume that you're going to be there for them. And yeah, sure, you can be there for them, but there are limits. You do have to think about yourself and what you're trying to do. It is Friday, last day of a working week for many, so there may be a feeling that there's a little bit of a hurry and you want to get things done. And it is a right approach, because the moon is making a square to Saturn. It's also making a square to the North Node. I mean, a North Node is in Pisces at the moment. And, with a North Node in Pisces, it's a time where Pisceans do need to be thinking about themselves. And it's not just a North Node in Pisces, it's Saturn conjunct the North Node in Pisces. And, with Saturn conjunct the North Node in Pisces, you should be quite selfish. It's absolutely okay to be selfish. And if there's something that you feel has to be done, then make sure that you do it. And it's not about making yourself popular, and you shouldn't worry too much about offending anyone. Because if you're open and honest right from the beginning, you're clear about what needs to be done, then you'll be respected. Of course, if you keep changing your mind, you give people some of your time, but not all of your time, and then you tell someone you're busy, then that can cause difficulties. So you probably should start the day as you mean to finish it, and just keep going until you've accomplished everything you need to do. And at the same time, other people's behavior, I mean, it may be annoying, but at times it may actually be interesting. You can still observe what people are doing, and you shouldn't be surprised if some people do things that you really weren't expecting. And at first you might be perplexed, but then you might be interested. So there's plenty to pique your curiosity, and you just don't want to fall into this curiosity, because just because you're curious about something doesn't mean that you should give it your time. You can do your research, you can follow up on this curiosity at a later stage, but you know, other people are capable of being entertaining, and it might be that a relationship takes an interesting turn. So that is possible. But Pisces, it is still very important that you get your priorities right. And the key aspect, as far as I'm concerned, is that Moon square Saturn, and it is about putting yourself and your interests and your ambitions first. Then, as you move into the weekend, you can be more relaxed. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 64, which is before completion. 64 is the last hexagram in the book. So the I Ching has 64 hexagrams. 64 is the last one, and it's kind of appropriate. It's that sort of yin-yang feeling with the I Ching that the last hexagram is not after completion, as you might expect. It's actually before completion. That is a reminder it might be the end, but it's not the end. And before completion is about being involved in something that we haven't completed it. And the image we should be focusing on is a river, and we are trying to cross this river and get to the other side. And it's a big river, it's not a trivial thing. And making that journey is absolutely not going to be easy. And we have 3 lines moving, and so today may be a day when we feel that we have to make some kind of transition. And maybe that's connected with that Venus sextile Pluto, and also from heliocentrically, we've got the Sun and Venus making a trine to Pluto. And so Pluto is about making a change. It might be a change of appearance. It might be a change of personnel, the people around us. We may feel that one group of people have had their day and we need to move on to another group of people. Maybe not even move on to another group of people. Maybe we're just trying to distance ourselves from certain people with Venus sextile Pluto. I mean, it depends on the situation. But we are trying to make a change. And because we've got 3 moving lines, that does indicate that it's a change that could be difficult, especially at the beginning. So the 3rd line moves, and so the 3rd line is a line that is often difficult, because in the I Ching that can be the nature of the 3rd line, and it's about trying to make a transition, but there may be a feeling that we don't have the strength. We don't have the strength, yet we have to make the crossing. And so this raises a question about what do we do if we're in that kind of position, if we don't have the strength. Somehow we've got to start that process, and it's not going to be easy, and we've got to use all our resources, and even then those resources might not be enough. So there is a bit of a contradiction here. We have to cross, but we don't have the strength to cross. So what do? We could take things slowly, but we can't take things too slowly, because if we're stuck on a near bank, that is not where we should be. We need to get going with this. And then the 4th line moves, and the 4th line is about the struggle, and it's talking about It's actually disciplining the devil's country. That's what I think it's a Wilhelm translation talks about, disciplining the devil's country, and it takes a long time. It takes 3 years. Of course, this is a reading for 1 day, so we can't really be talking about 3 years. So that is a situation where it is difficult, but we are making progress. In the end, we're getting where we want to go. And yeah, it's hard, but we're getting closer to the other side. And then the top line moves. And the top line is about completion. We've made it. We've made that transition. And we might feel very good about it, having done that, having made that transition. And there is a danger here. In the moment of victory, when we feel things are finally coming together, there is a danger of complacency, that we just feel that there's nothing more we have to do. And if we are complacent, then there's a danger that we mess up. We needn't mess up, absolutely unnecessary to lose all our gains. And maybe we're reminded of Mars on the fixed star Castor. Now, Mars on Castor can, at the moment, can be about making rapid progress, but just not being able to see it through, and it coming apart at the end because we mess up, because we're not consistent enough. So we've got to be very sensible about it, but we can do it. It's not, the I Ching is not saying we will mess up. It's saying that there is a danger of messing up, because we see the new dawn, things are there, but there's something we miss and it all crumbles away. But again, it needn't happen if we are really very alert and we have good attention to detail. And with these 3 lines moving, that means we move to a second hexagram, and that second hexagram is pushing upward. And that's an optimistic message here. That does indicate that in spite of all the problems of a previous hexagram before completion, in the end, we are going to be able to make it, and we will make good progress. And so it's not an easy day, but it's a day that where we can make good progress, and whatever obstacles there are, we can actually get over them, and we can get to the other side of a bank and other side of a river, and we can make further progress. And now I want to consider Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, and it's something that is straightforward. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking about politics, and let's just keep it simple and uncontroversial, and just talk about Aries. And so Aries, when we talk about Aries, of course, we're talking about the sun in Aries, and so the sun in Aries is exalted. Generally speaking. The sun works well in Aries. So, when we think about the 12 signs, we're supposed to think about the 12 signs in a sort of a neutral way. And, we can be neutral maybe when we're talking about the ascendant, but if we're talking about the sun signs, it is in theory the case that some sun signs are more fortunate than other sun signs. And logically, the best place to have your sun is in Leo, because the sun rules Leo. And if you take William Lilly's point system, it gets +5 because it's in its rulership. And the second best place to have your sun is in Aries, because the sun is exalted in Aries. And again, Lilly's point system, it gets +4. And you can go down, and you can go back by triplicity. The sun rules the far signs by day. So if you're born by day and you've got your sun in Sagittarius, that's pretty good. Not so good if you're born by night, and then you can go down through other more sort of minor essential dignities. So Sun in Aries is a good place to have your Sun. And I sometimes think that people with Sun in Aries do have a certain luck. I think that particularly in the United Kingdom, I think people who have the Aries, I often get the feeling that people with Sun in Aries have more luck than other people. Maybe that's because according to sort of Ptolemy's system, when he was dividing up the sort of the classical world, the northwest quadrant was sort of ruled by the fire signs, and sort of places like Germany and England were ruled by the far signs, and so there is a connection perhaps between the Sun and between Aries and Britain. And also if you take Britain's chart, if you take the view that Britain one chart is noon December 25th 1066, you've got Aries rising, so there is a sort of Aries feel to the UK, to Britain maybe, and so it's a good sign to have. Maybe it's a fire sign, and we shouldn't forget that it's a fire sign. And because it's a fire sign, it's intuitive. If you take the Jungian approach and you link intuition with fire, that means that people who have the Sun in Aries are able to just make links. They don't have to work it out. It just all comes together, and so that's when an Aries is working really well. The links are just obvious. They are instantaneous, and they have a vision about the way things should be. And that's how an effective Aries works. They just get it straight away, and because of that, Aries has a certain sort of reputation for being exciting. It is the first sign of the zodiac, and the first sign of the zodiac. Some ways of looking at the zodiac see the 12 signs of the zodiac as being some kind of life cycle. You start with Aries and you move through Aries, the impulsive warrior, and then you end with Pisces, which is a sort of a more complicated receptive sign. But Aries is the beginning. It is that first impulse. It is that raw creativity, and the first is always the creative. If you look at the I Ching, the first hexagram in the I Ching is number 1, which is the creative. It starts. It's not about the ideas yet. It's just that creative impulse, and that's how Aries wants to be. And you can then see why Aries is such an exciting sign. And I don't really know many Arians. I don't think I know anyone who's an Aries at the moment. When I was when I was younger, when I was at university, I knew people who were Aries, and there was always something about them that was exciting. Gemini has ideas, and Gemini. I'm a Gemini. You can have ideas, but there's a limit to ideas. It doesn't go anywhere. Where's the action? But Aries is quite spontaneous, and also Aries, when it's on best form, for example, isn't too bothered about money. Other signs can be worried about money, and money can be a reason why you can't do things. But there's a certain spontaneous generosity to Aries. They're not concerned about money. Money is just some petty thing which the impulsiveness of Aries just should not be interested in. That doesn't mean to say that Arians are not concerned about money, but in a raw form, I would have said that Aries is not an especially materialistic sign, because it is all about action. Though Aries is also about the self, when I was learning, I learned Astrology. I mean, obviously one is still learning everything. One's never reached the stage when one has learnt it. But I did a correspondence course in Astrology run by a woman called Olivia Berkeley. She was quite a major player in traditional astrology and at the end of the 20th century. And she was a Sagittarius. She was incredibly blunt woman. She really said what she felt. And we, every year there was, I don't know whether it still happens, but every year people would meet in a pub in the summer in Walton-on-Thames to celebrate the life of William Lilly, who died in the 17th century, was working in the 17th century, and I think he was church warden of the local church. And we were in the pub, and I remember I was with Olivia, and there was someone else was there, and she was an Aries, and then Olivia quite loudly said, she gave her description of what Aries was like, and she said, I think if I got it right, she said, all Arians are bastards. I mean, that was her view, and I'm not saying I agree with that, but what she means by that, I think, is that there is a side to Aries that does just put their own interests first. It's themselves, and there can be utter selfishness about Aries. Would I agree with that? I'm not sure. I mean, I think that, as I said, I understand why she said what she said. But certainly in her perception, if people who are in Aries, they do what they want to do. And they're not going to be constrained. But that is the nature of Aries. And that's what Aries is all about in its raw form. And, with Aries, well, certainly Sun in Aries, we shouldn't forget that Sun in Aries, Sun is a male planet. And there might be the question here, what happens if a woman has her Sun in Aries? Now, I am of the view that projection is something very real in astrology, that in a male chart, the female planets are likely to be projected. In a female chart, the male planets are likely to be projected. So a woman is likely, I mean, not saying will, but to project her Mars and her Sun. And so it's possible that a woman with Sun in Aries might either project her Sun in Aries or perhaps be less comfortable with it. And I'm not trying to be controversial here, but you could then argue that perhaps some of the more negative traits of Aries are going to be more apparent in the female chart than in the male chart because it's projectable. I mean, I'm not saying that as a fact. I'm just thinking that is a possibility. And so those are a few thoughts about Aries. And what I wanted to do now was just to look at a few famous Aries people and to really consider to what extent they manifest the qualities of Aries. So let's start off with Anton LaVey. And so Anton LaVey, born in 1930, he was the founder of the Church of Satan, and he had the sun in Aries. And you might say that Satanism in the modern form is a very Aries concept. Satanism is about doing what you want. One is reminded of Aleister Crowley's statement. What did he say? He said, "Do as thou wilt shalt be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will." I think that's what he said. And so if you take that literally, I mean, I think he meant, I don't think it was quite as hedonistic as it sounds, do as thou wilt shalt be the whole of the law, but one is actually trying to find one's true will. And if you read his book, I did read his book, what's it called? Diary of a Drug Fiend. So Diary of a Drug Fiend, in the end, his characters it was written in the early 20s, before the invention of helicopters, but still, the character realized that his true will was to invent helicopters, and there's a huge equation at the end of Diary of a Drug Fiend, which is a reminder that Crowley did actually study mathematics at Cambridge. I don't think he graduated, though. So that concept of finding one's true will is a concept that's important to modern Satanism. It's all about having no guilt. We shouldn't be restrained by bourgeois morality or Judeo-Christian morality, and Satan represents the concept of freedom. And so maybe Anton LaVey, with his Sun in Aries, was reflecting what Sun in Aries is all about. And people who have Sun in Aries, there is nothing limiting them. They can say what's on their mind, and they don't care who they offend. And people with Sun in Aries can be incredibly articulate. An example would be Christopher Hitchens. So Christopher Hitchens, the journalist who has very, very strong opinions about religion. I mean, obviously, what he said about Islam and particularly Islam, but also Christianity. He has 4 planets in Aries, so he's very clear about what he believes, and he's a very effective arguer. Notice how Christopher Hitchens has, he does have planets in air. He does have a moon. He might have no planets in air if he has a moon in no traditional. I mean, he'll have Neptune in Libra. It's possible if he was born late in the day, but I don't have a time of birth for him. But his moon was in Scorpio. Sorry, what am I talking about? There's something missing in his chart. He's got plenty of planets in air. He's got Moon, Jupiter, and Neptune. There's just no Earth in his chart. That's what I knew. There was a gap, that blank there. It wasn't. If you look at that chart, sorry, let me rephrase that. Christopher Hitchens, he's got lots of planets in air. He's got lots of planets in fire, but there's probably nothing in water, unless the moon is in Scorpio, and he doesn't have any planets in Earth, and so you can say that is an incredibly dynamic chart. And going back to fire as a being about intuition, he just gets the picture straight away. Now, his picture might be wrong, but fire signs don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. Not really. It's just immediate, and that's sort of reflected also by the way he communicates, by complete fluency, not having to speak without notes. He can speak without notes. Just the ideas come flowing. And Christopher Hitchens is someone who is often linked with another famous atheist, is Richard Dawkins. So Richard Dawkins has the Sun in Aries. He doesn't have the kind of fire that Christopher Hitchens had, but you could say that Sun in Aries represents freedom. He wants to be free. Maybe he wants to be free from a god. Going back to Anton LaVey wanting to free himself from Judeo-Christianity and the Church of Satan. Of course, Richard Dawkins doesn't believe in Satan. He doesn't believe in God. He is an atheist, and there's also his communication style, kind of similar to Christopher Hitchens. Not as, I wouldn't have said quite as fluent. I mean, he's pretty fluent, Richard Dawkins, but there is a certain anger to Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens in terms of the way they communicate. And that anger can actually be an Aries trait. Just showing that anger, showing perhaps a dismissiveness of alternative views, and in certain cases, being able to argue. And we kind of get a similar picture, not in an intellectual way, I would say. he's not an academic or anything, but Piers Morgan, is always angry. We see a lot of Piers Morgan recently, and Piers Morgan, Sun in Aries. I think you could almost tell that Piers Morgan is an Aries. He likes the sound of his own voice, and he likes to be critical, and recently been famous for his complete disdain for that woman who can't be mentioned, and so I think Aries is actually a sign that, of all the 12 signs, probably Aries is one of the easier signs to spot. If you think about Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Piers Morgan, I think you would just guess Aries. I mean, it's just fairly obvious. It's not always as easy as that, but in many cases it is. And someone in this vein who has got a lot of coverage on YouTube is Cenk Uygur. Cenk Uygur, again, you could guess he's an Aries. I don't know whether you've come across him, but he has this channel, The Young Turks, and this comes from a sort of left-wing perspective, and he is very, very verbal, incredibly vocal about his opinions and passionate about what he thinks. And so if you look up Cenk Uygur, if you haven't come across him, and you just look at him for 5 minutes, you will see that Cenk Uygur is very much an Aries. And so people who have that sort of Aries ability just to communicate, they may reach the wrong conclusions at times, but they really do feel that they've got something to say. And with Aries, we should never forget that Aries is a fire sign, and that Aries is about making connections, and making some interesting connections. And one woman who is an Aries, who I don't know a great deal about her, but some of her views are certainly interesting, is Camille Paglia. We do have a time of birth for her. So Camille Paglia is, how does one describe her, as a public intellectual? She is a feminist, and her political views, it seems to have been something of a journey. I don't really want to sort of describe in detail her views, because I might get it wrong, but she's certainly a feminist, and she has strong ideas about sexuality, and her early research was on sexuality and class and I think classical art or something like that. And she's very strident in terms of her views. She's very clear about what she believes. She doesn't seem to be a person who suffers fools gladly, but she is someone with the sun in Aries who is trying to make connections, and she's trying to make connections between lots of different things that other people can't make these connections. So if I've understood her theory correctly, she's said a lot about the transsexualism, and this how transsexualism, this obsession with trans has become so important over the last few years. And she has a theory about it, and we should be interested in this as astrologers, because as astrologers we're interested in outer planets, and we're interested in cycles, and we're interested in changes in culture. And her theory goes like this, is that if I've got it right, that this obsession with sexuality in general is, as far as she's concerned, is a sign of a declining civilization. And she relates it to past civilizations that went into decline. And she points out how statues of men changed, how she said, from being shown in a very sort of heroic, masculine way. As a society declines, then they become they become more feminized. And she also points out that, with the end of, the Weimar Republic, with Weimar Republic at the end, people got obsessed about sexuality and the whole trans thing. I think the trans things was part of an issue, was part of what was going on at the end of the Weimar Republic. And so she sees I think she sees a trans obsession. I think she sees it as something of an obsession. She sees that obsession as being a sign of the end of Western civilization. And this is a hallmark of the end of a civilization. She's noticed it over a long period of time. And so, this is an example perhaps of Aries working, not just in terms of being strident, being clear about its views, but also making connections which other people don't see. But I would look up Camille Paglia if you haven't come across her, because she does say some interesting things, and her videos of her are certainly available on YouTube. And let's now look at some politicians who have Sun in Aries. I mean, some politicians or people who are concerned with the political process have Sun in Aries. I mean, an example of someone who is completely unsuccessful, I would have said, would be the former Secretary of State in the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. So Antony Blinken was a completely unsuccessful Secretary of State who, he might have got on well with people in the West, in Western Europe, but he just could not deal with Russia. He found it difficult to deal with Saudi Arabia. He was generally ineffective. And perhaps that had something to do with his Sun in Aries, because at its worst, Sun in Aries could have a particular view of the world, his neocon view of the world, and he believes he's right. And in his case, the Sun was conjunct Mercury, so Mercury was combust. So he was so into himself, Aries. He had all his intuitions, and we talked about Camille Paglia having her intuitions about the way things are. But maybe his intuitions were too focused on himself, and maybe he fundamentally got it wrong. And Sun trine Uranus, he thought that some things were important, and Sun trine Uranus, we see Sun trine Uranus as being revolutionary, but Sun trine Uranus can also be dogmatic. There is a dogmatism to Uranus in Leo, and I've got Uranus in Leo. I've got my Uranus. I was born a month after him, but that Sun trine Uranus is dogmatic. Believes he's got the answers, but maybe he hasn't got the answers. And if you're in the UK, a politician who's got the Sun in Aries is Angela Rayner. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister. She has got a lot to say for herself. I'm not convinced there's much content there, but Aries, she perhaps reflects the fact, she's got Sun in Aries. She seems to be, she's certainly strident, and she complains a lot, and she talks a lot, and she's quite fluent. But I don't think there's much content. I don't think there's much content there. But she perhaps does show herself to be an Aries, and she's in England, and in the UK, people who've got their Sun in Aries do well, and she's done well. She's Deputy Prime Minister, and so. She's spontaneous. She says what she feels. Sometimes gets herself into trouble. So that's the way Sun in Aries can work. And Sun in Aries can be impatient with things that are happening too slow. And for example, governments can be really annoying, and governments have their own way of doing things. And if we could just find solutions. And Klaus Schwab, who's founded the World Economic Forum, had the Sun in Aries. It's his birthday coming up, isn't it? And so he's got the Sun in Aries, he's got Sun-Saturn conjunction in Aries. And one of the ideas of the World Economic Forum is to get beyond governments. Governments just slow things down. But let's bring all these world leaders together and let's find real solutions and let's find action. Of course, in the process, democracy might get thrown out of a window and the elites take over. But the elites know better. Let's just let the elites take the action and let's do it quickly. And let's not just waste time with. We don't want to waste time with individual countries and their national interests. Let's look at the big picture. So that might be, in his case, how Sun in Aries is working. And then there is Nigel Farage. So Nigel Farage has his Sun in Aries, and I think that Nigel Farage does represent that idea that you can be intuitive about it. You can get an intuitive picture. I think that Nigel Farage has an intuition about the way things are moving, and he clearly has a belief that he is right. He doesn't have any air in his chart, and so it's easy if you haven't got any air in your chart. You're able to just say what's on your mind, and so you look at Christopher Hitchens could speak without notes, and so could Nigel Farage. So can Nigel Farage, and he just knows the answers. Now, sometimes if you've got Sun in Aries and you're wrong, then there could be problems. And of course, in the case of a Reform Party, there's a major fissure forming in the Reform Party. I don't know the full details. It has a lot to do with whether or not certain people can be deported, but I wouldn't want to go too much into the details until I really read up about it. But I think in terms of Nigel Farage and the way he presents himself and the way he communicates so spontaneously, I think you can see the Sun in Aries at work. And the Sun in Aries could have or can have a physicality to it in terms of sports, action. People who have Sun in Aries, they often like things that are fast. And so Ayrton Senna, the racing car driver who was killed in the San Marino Grand Prix, I think in 1994, had the Sun in Aries. In fact, today, 21st, is his birthday, so he'd be 65. So I'm afraid we have to say, well, it would have been his birthday. So happy birthday, Ayrton Senna, wherever you are. And Sun in Aries goes around the track, likes the speed, and there is also the intuitive side to the Sun in Aries, just knowing where everything is on the racetrack, and that must be useful. It might also be something to do with water. There's a feeling for the way where other cars are, his Venus and Mercury in Pisces, but also the Sun in Aries would perhaps give him an intuition about the way where things go. Another person who had a Sun in Aries who liked speed was Steve McQueen. So Steve McQueen, famous for Bullitt, the car chase in Bullitt, plus the scene in The Great Escape where he gets caught up in the wire trying to take his motorbike over into Switzerland, but they're just failing at the last moment. And in real life, Steve McQueen liked racing, he liked speed, he liked action, and so I would have said that Steve McQueen does personify the Sun in Aries. And finally, if you've got Sun in Aries, you just might refuse to be told. You want to cut corners. You want to just do what you want, and you're not going to allow material reality to get in your way. And that was the case with Stockton Rush. So Stockton Rush was the founder of OceanGate, who wanted to explore the Titanic. He hated bureaucracy. He thought it was unnecessary for his submarines to be tested. He wanted to do it his way. He thought a fiberglass hull was fine. He believed he knew right. He could do it right. And so there was a spontaneousness to him, but there was a stubbornness to it also. And ultimately a selfishness to it. So he wasn't going to be constrained by material reality. And it's kind of interesting with Stockton Rush's chart that Stockton Rush, Sun in Aries, with no Earth in his chart. So the realities, even though he was, he had very good education, the realities of the fact that materials like carbon fiber have limits, he ignored those realities, or pretended they didn't exist, because it's what he wanted to do. And that can be perhaps an issue with Aries. You believe that you so believe you're right, you so want to be right that you can ignore material reality. And of course what happened was that he took the submarine down too many times, and it got destroyed at the bottom of the Atlantic, and it didn't just kill him, it killed his passengers. So that's perhaps Aries at its worst. Anyway, those are a few thoughts on Aries. Maybe I'm just telling you stuff that you already know. Maybe I'm just stating the obvious, but I thought it'd be a good idea, as the sun has just gone into Aries, to have another look at this sign, in particular, with what it means when the sun is here. So thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.